Meet Talia and Noah. They're both 27. They both just signed leases on nearly identical two-bedroom apartments in the same city, paying $1,800 a month in rent. Both of them earn $58,000 a year. Both of them have a spare bedroom sitting empty. From that identical starting point, they make two completely different decisions about what to do with that second room, and over the next several years, that single decision is going to ripple through their finances, their schedules, and their day-to-day lives in ways neither of them expects on day one. There are 7 points to this comparison, and each one peels back another layer of what just split the rent actually costs and actually saves. Let's go through them in order. Noah keeps his second bedroom exactly as it is, a guest room, an office, occasional storage. He pays the full $1,800 himself, every month, and enjoys total privacy, total quiet, and total control over his own space. Talia takes a different approach. She lists her second bedroom, finds a roommate within a couple of weeks, and splits the rent, now paying $900 a month instead of $1,800. On paper, this looks like the simplest financial decision in the world: cut your biggest expense in half. It's also considerably more complicated than that once you look past the first number. Here's the incorrect way most people run this comparison, the way it usually gets framed online. Renting out a room saves you money, therefore it's the smart choice, full stop, end of analysis. That framing treats the second $900 a month as pure, uncomplicated savings, when in reality it's a trade: money for privacy, money for autonomy, money for a series of small daily frictions that don't show up on a spreadsheet but absolutely show up in real life. Point 1. The number everyone focuses on looks like a clean win, which is exactly where lazy versions of this comparison stop. Let's start with the number everyone focuses on, because it is genuinely significant. Talia saves $900 a month compared to Noah, or $10,800 a year. If she takes that entire difference and invests it consistently in a diversified index fund, at a long-term average return of around 7% after inflation, that $10,800 a year compounds meaningfully over time. 5 years in, her invested savings have grown to roughly $65,000. Noah, spending the full $1,800 every month with nothing extra to invest from this specific decision, has nothing comparable to show for it in this particular column. If the story stopped here, it would be a clean, simple case for Talia's choice, and countless personal finance videos do stop exactly here. But this is precisely where the incorrect version of this comparison gets lazy, treating an empty bedroom purely as an underused financial asset instead of asking what actually happens when another person moves into your home. Point 2. The hidden cost of sharing space, in friction, in well-being, and in the small logistics nobody puts a number on. Talia's roommate situation, for the first year, goes reasonably well. They split chores loosely, keep different schedules, and mostly stay out of each other's way. But small frictions accumulate in ways that are easy to underestimate from the outside. A roommate who has friends over more often than expected. Disagreements about the thermostat, or whose turn it is to buy household basics, or noise late at night before an early work shift. None of these are dramatic on their own. Together, over months, they add up to something real, a background layer of negotiation that simply doesn't exist in Noah's apartment. Psychologist Robert Putnam, whose research on social capital and community life has been widely cited across sociology and public policy, has written extensively about how shared living arrangements shape both social connection and daily stress in ways that pure cost accounting misses entirely. Living with another person can genuinely increase social connection and reduce isolation, a real and measurable benefit for some people, particularly those who live far from family or are new to a city. For others, especially people who recharge through solitude rather than company, the same arrangement produces a quiet, cumulative drain that never shows up as a single bad day, just as a slightly lower baseline of comfort in your own home, day after day, for as long as the arrangement lasts. This is exactly the piece Talia didn't factor into her decision, because it isn't a line item, it's a lived experience, and it varies enormously from person to person in ways a spreadsheet can't capture. For someone who genuinely enjoys company and finds an empty apartment lonely, sharing space might improve quality of life while also saving money, a genuine win on both fronts. For someone who does their best thinking and feels most at ease in complete privacy, the exact same arrangement can quietly erode well-being even while the bank account grows. There's a smaller but recurring cost worth naming too, one that never gets mentioned in a simple version of this comparison, the actual mechanics of splitting a shared household beyond just rent. Utilities, internet, shared groceries, cleaning supplies, all of it requires some system, a shared app, a running tally, an honest conversation when one person uses noticeably more electricity running a home office setup than the other. Noah never has this conversation with anyone, because there's no one to have it with. Talia has some version of it every few months, sometimes trivial, occasionally tense, always another small transaction cost that a simple $900 versus $1,800 comparison completely ignores. Point 3. When things go wrong, the risk sits somewhere. The simple, just split the rent, framing never accounts for. Let's look at what happens when things go wrong, because this is the risk that the simple, just split the rent, framing consistently underweights. In year 2, Talia's roommate loses their job and falls 2 months behind on rent before eventually moving out on short notice. Talia is legally responsible for the full $1,800 during that gap, since her name alone is on the lease. She covers it from savings, an unplanned $3,600 hit that never would have existed in Noah's situation, because Noah's monthly obligation was never split with anyone else's financial stability in the first place. This isn't a rare edge case dressed up as a cautionary tale. Shared housing arrangements carry exactly this kind of counterparty risk by their very nature, and it's a cost that belongs in the honest version of this comparison, even though it doesn't show up every single year. Housing economist Enrico Moretti, whose research has focused extensively on the economics of housing costs and how people make trade-offs around where and how they live, has noted that the true cost of a housing decision includes not just the monthly payment but the volatility and risk embedded in that arrangement. A guaranteed $1,800 with full control is a fundamentally different financial product than a variable $900 that depends on someone else consistently honoring their half of an agreement, even if the two numbers look similar on a budget spreadsheet in a good month. There's a specific complication worth naming too, because it changes the calculation for a meaningful number of people making this decision: dating and relationships. In year 4, Talia starts seeing someone seriously, and the awkwardness of a new partner staying over regularly while a roommate is also living in the apartment becomes a real, recurring source of friction, one that has nothing to do with money and everything to do with the basic mismatch between a shared living arrangement and a private relationship developing inside it. Noah, dating during that same period, never has to navigate this particular layer of complexity, since his apartment has exactly one residence schedule and comfort to consider. Talia rebounds from that setback, finds a new roommate within a few weeks, and returns to her $900 monthly split. This time, she's more careful about screening, asking for references, verifying income before signing anyone on. It's an extra layer of effort Noah simply never has to think about, another small, recurring cost of the arrangement that has nothing to do with dollars and everything to do with time and mental energy. Point 4. The arrangement gets better with practice, and here's what the 10-year numbers actually look like on both sides. By year 6, Talia has gotten noticeably better at this. Her third roommate turns out to be an excellent match, similar schedule, similar cleanliness standards, similar preference for quiet evenings during the week. The friction that defined her first 2 years largely disappears, replaced by something closer to genuine, low-effort companionship. This is worth naming honestly too, because the early version of shared living rarely represents the steady-state experience. Screening improves with practice, expectations get clearer with each conversation, and the version of cohabitation that exists in year 6 often looks very different from the version that existed in year 1, in ways that a single snapshot comparison would completely miss. Her invested savings at that point sit at roughly $58,000, slightly lower than the clean scenario because of that one bad stretch, but still substantially ahead of Noah in pure financial terms. 10 years in, assuming she continues investing the difference consistently and experiences no further major disruptions, her invested position grows to roughly $161,000. Noah, over that same decade, has nothing comparable in this specific column, because his $1,800 a month simply covered his housing and nothing beyond it. Here's where the incorrect framing would declare Talia the clear winner and move on. But Noah's 10 years looked different in ways that matter too, and they're worth naming honestly instead of dismissing as a soft, unquantifiable footnote. He worked from home 3 days a week without ever negotiating shared space or noise. He hosted a difficult family member for a month during a health emergency without needing anyone's permission or having an awkward conversation about it first. He built a woodworking hobby in that spare room that turned into a small side income, something considerably harder to do with a roommate's belongings occupying the same square footage. None of that shows up as a number, but all of it shaped how his life actually felt to live, day after day, for a full decade. Point 5. What the actual research on predicting your own happiness says about this trade-off. On both sides of the ledger, psychologist Ed Diener, whose research on subjective well-being has shaped much of how researchers study life satisfaction, found repeatedly that people are often poor predictors of what will actually make them happy over time, particularly when a decision trades a small, certain daily comfort for a larger, less certain future benefit. Talia's $161,000 is real and substantial. Whether it was worth 10 years of negotiated space, occasional friction, and the underlying uncertainty of depending on someone else's reliability depends entirely on something no financial calculator can measure: how much Talia's own well-being was affected by sharing her home, a variable that's completely different from person to person and impossible to average across a general audience. Diener's broader body of work also points to something worth sitting with directly, that people frequently overestimate how much a specific financial outcome will affect their long-term happiness, while underestimating how much daily environment and daily social friction actually shapes it. That doesn't mean Talia made the wrong call. It means the $161,000 figure, however impressive it looks on screen, was never actually the full measure of the decision, just the part of it that happens to be easy to put a number on. The part that doesn't reduce to a number, whether a decade of negotiated space left her net happier or net more drained, is something only Talia herself could answer honestly, and it likely would have been a different answer with a different roommate history, a different personality, or a different city. There's a fair question worth raising on Noah's side of the ledger too, because the honest version of this comparison can't only scrutinize Talia's choice. Noah's $900 a month in additional housing cost is itself an opportunity cost, money that could have gone toward his own investments, his own down payment, his own financial goals, had he made a different trade. Choosing privacy isn't free, it has a real, quantifiable price tag attached to it, exactly $10,800 a year, and pretending otherwise would be just as dishonest as pretending Talia's roommate situations came at zero cost beyond the dollars. The question was never whether one path has costs and the other doesn't. Both paths have real costs. The only question is which specific costs you'd rather carry. Point 6. The middle path most people never consider, a bounded, goal-driven arrangement instead of an open-ended one. There's a third option worth naming directly, because it's often the actual best answer hiding underneath the either or framing. Some people rent out a room specifically during a defined window, saving aggressively for a down payment, paying off a specific debt, or building a particular financial cushion, with a clear end date in mind from the start. Picture a third person here, Talia's friend Jordan, who rents out his spare room for exactly 18 months with the single stated goal of saving $20,000 toward a house down payment. He tells his roommate up front that the lease won't be renewed past that window, sets clear expectations from day one specifically because the arrangement is temporary and goal-driven rather than open-ended, and finds that both the financial benefit and the psychological cost feel entirely different when there's a visible finish line attached to them. This captures much of Talia's financial advantage without requiring an indefinite commitment to shared living. Once the specific goal is met, the room reverts to being a home office or a guest space, the same choice Noah made from day one, just delayed by a deliberate, clearly bounded stretch instead of ruled out entirely. There's also a version worth naming that favors renting out the room more strongly than the average case suggests: someone who's naturally social, works from an office rather than home, and travels frequently enough that an empty apartment already feels underused most nights of the week anyway. For that person, the friction Talia experienced barely registers, because they're rarely home to encounter it, and the $900 a month in savings comes at close to zero real cost to their day-to-day life. Point 7. How to actually decide which path fits you. So how do you actually decide which path fits you, instead of just defaulting to whichever number looks bigger on a spreadsheet? Start by being honest about how you personally recharge, whether solitude restores your energy or slowly drains it, because that single trait predicts more about your satisfaction with this decision than any amount of financial modeling ever will. Then consider your actual home usage. Someone who's rarely home experiences the downside of a roommate far less than someone who works from that apartment every single day. Consider, too, where you are in your dating life and how a shared living arrangement might interact with a relationship that's likely to develop over the coming years, since that timing rarely gets factored in until it's already causing friction. If you do decide to rent out the room, treat the screening process the way Talia eventually learned to, checking references and verifying income before signing anyone on, and build a small buffer into your savings specifically to cover a vacancy or a payment gap, since the real math includes that risk even in years it doesn't materialize. Set clear expectations up front about shared expenses and shared space, ideally in writing, rather than assuming they'll sort themselves out naturally once someone moves in. And consider, from the very start, whether this is meant to be an open-ended arrangement or a bounded one with a specific financial goal and a specific end date, since the two versions of this decision carry very different psychological weight even when the monthly numbers look identical. And if you decide privacy is worth the full $1,800, that's not an inferior financial decision automatically, it's simply a decision that values something real, control over your own space, that doesn't show up as a line item but shapes how every single day in that apartment actually feels to live. And to close things out, here's the point that ties all 7 together. Talia and Noah started with the exact same rent, the exact same income, and the exact same empty second bedroom. 10 years later, one of them has roughly $161,000 sitting in an investment account, built through a decade of negotiated space and the occasional setback. The other has a full decade of complete autonomy over his own home, a hobby that grew into income, and a guest room that was always exactly where he needed it to be. Neither of them made the wrong choice. They simply valued two different things that were never going to show up on the same line of the same spreadsheet.